good morning and welcome to Rising. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's another exciting day in Washington, D.C. with some of Trump's pointy confirmation hearings getting underway. The Pete Hegseth hearing is ongoing right now. Good to see you again, Niall. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's great to be with you, Robby, and yet another exciting day. Are there any other kind of days in Washington, D.C.?
No, only exciting ones.
Only exciting ones. So let's get to it. What is on your radar, Robby?
Well, longtime conservative Washington Post columnist Jennifer Rubin has finally had enough, quitting the mainstream newspaper yesterday. Now, I put conservative in scare quotes because she really wasn't conservative, not at least by the standards of today. If you say you're Republican, but you utterly despise Donald Trump and everything he stands for, that might make you ideal for a newspaper columnist gig, but it doesn't really mean you can be properly considered as on the right anymore. The Washington Post, the New York Times, and other legacy media outlets love to heap praise and well-paying commentary jobs on never-Trump Republicans like Rubin, even though they represent almost zero real voters. Indeed, to the extent that they're popular with anyone, is that their hatred of Trump is mostly for a liberal audience. Well, either Rubin is tired of WAPO or WAPO is tired of Rubin. The parting of the ways is likely due to Post owner Jeff Bezos declining to allow the paper to endorse Kamala Harris for president. Rubin thinks the way to effectively counter Trump and Trumpism is to denounce him in ever more strenuous terms. So she's striking off on her own to launch The Contrarian with Norm Eisen, a former White House ethics czar. The Contrarian will launch on Substack with all sorts of content. Check out this video announcement.
Hi, I'm Jen Rubin.
And I'm Norm Eisen.
I am here to announce I am leaving the Washington Post in order to co-found with Norm an exciting new online platform, The Contrarian. We are going to bring you written material, podcasts, interviews, social media, all in defense of democracy. Our intent is to combat the authoritarian force that we all face. To help us, we have an exciting array of contributors from all walks of life, all ages, all backgrounds to help us in this venture.
We're going to do politics, we're going to do law, but we know that any successful pro-democracy movement also has to be very vocal about culture. We'll have a humor column. We'll even have a cooking column, but we're going to sprinkle in a little bit of pro-democracy flavor.
And we're going to have pets. We're very pro-pets.
I'm expecting all the edgy contrarianness of like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I know I only want to read pop culture and food content if it includes some heavy-handed pro-democracy messaging. But look, in all seriousness, if Rubin, for some reason, thinks that our media ecosystem really needs yet another media outlet designated to bashing Trump as a menacing threat to democracy, go forth. I think that market's a bit saturated, but who knows? Now, one thing she can't do, however, is take the position that her work is contrarian. I object to that word, which is the name of her new publication. It's an ill-fitting one. Nothing Jennifer Rubin has ever done is contrarian. Indeed, her entire career has involved reflecting a kind of establishment beltway conservative consensus that was totally at odds with what actual Republican voters want and value. Her knee-jerk opposition to everything Trump says, does, and represents isn't contrarian at all. It's the de facto and dominant opinion among newspaper columnists, elite tastemakers, and mainstream media news pundits. To the extent that Jennifer Rubin has said, written, or done anything one can describe as contrarian, or at least spicy, it was probably this.
You can't talk broad themes. You have to boil it down to nuts and bolts, and you have to be pithy. What do I mean by pithy? How about this? Republicans want to kill your kids. It's actually true.
Kill your kids. Now, who's Jennifer Rubin involving in this new project? Some of the least contrarian thinkers and writers and pundits there are. A press release announcing the new publication lists Lincoln Project founder and career grifter George Conway, satire writer Andy Borowitz, one of the least funny people to ever somehow stumble into a job. There are MSNBC and ex-WAPO talking heads. Look, many of them people who've done perfectly fine work. I respect them as commentators, but they are hardly an example of contrarianism. Have any of these people ever taken a bold stance that was counter to the mainstream narrative? Did they dissent on a COVID-related topic, for instance? What about foreign policy? Have they ever dissented from the bipartisan blob advocating more interventionism, Ukraine, Israel, etc.? Of course not, because they are not real contrarians.
So, Robby, I suppose in this seat I'm supposed to defend Jennifer Rubin, and I'm not.
You don't have to do that.
I'm not in any great rush to do that. Look, I think there are two separate points. One is the validity or legitimacy of very vigorous criticism of Mr. Trump, and of course that is permissible as it would be of any political figure, and if it comes from an authentic and sincere place, I think that's fine. Like you, I have two issues with this announcement from Jennifer Rubin, which you have alluded to. The notion that she is a conservative writer, I mean, even beyond her views on Trump, she was at one point, I think, conservative many years ago. I have not seen her express any conservative opinion about anything in several years. Now, if she has, I will stand corrected. The other point is the contrarian point, which I started laughing about as soon as you started talking about it, because it is, I mean, whether her view of Trump is correct or not is, I mean, inevitably in the eye of the beholder. But to suggest that those views are contrarian when they are voluminously reflected on the airwaves of MSNBC, the airwaves of CNN, the editorial pages of the New York Times, the Washington Post, the New Yorker, etc., etc. And furthermore, it is not, I mean, there's a broader thing where she does not really buck the consensus in any way at all. It's a very, liberal anti-Trump consensus that she completely caters to. I don't know. I think I met her once briefly. She was a perfectly pleasant woman. But
I met her once briefly. She's nice, yeah.
But it's just the claim or the idea that she is bravely fighting against prevailing orthodoxies or has ever recently been a conservative voice. I think both those claims are ludicrous.
And this media space is pretty crowded for just over-the-top, anti-Trump, I would say hysteria. You might say legitimate criticism. There are other outlets already doing this, even for, ostensibly, we are conservatives who hate Trump, your bulwarks, your dispatches.
Right.
Like, that market is pretty tapped out, I think. So I don't put a lot of faith in this project. Obviously, you can be successful on Substack with those views, and really any other set of views if you're, and she's productive. She blogs a lot for the Washington Post. I don't think very highly of the quality of the writing, but if she turns that out, she could do it, but it seems like a lot.
Yeah, I would say that I do think there are people who typically don't get maybe as much attention as the kind of never Trump people that we're talking about. There are Republican dissenters from Trumpism who I do think are sincere and acting in good faith and have not become Democrats out of their opposition to Trump, actually have conservative ideological positions and dislike Trump because of what they see as his narcissism, his lack of preparedness, etc., his, as they would say it, authoritarian tendencies. So I think that constituency does exist. I just don't think that, Jen Rubin and those other people are really part of it.
I mean, it's a small constituency. I mean, there are definitely Republicans who are like, yeah, Trump is not my favorite. He's not an ideal vehicle for these views. I find some of his personal behavior obnoxious. I think that's different from and I oppose him, and I must be against him from within the Republican Party. There is much less outright opposition. There's almost none within the party itself now. That was not true 4 years ago, 8 years ago. There was actual active opposition to him within the party. But he won, and he's more popular. You can't even argue that without him, the Republican Party would be better in shape. You could make that argument in 2020 because some of the other candidates, the Senate candidates, et cetera, performed better on the ballot. This time, he outperformed everybody else on the ballot in the own party. So it is remarkable how much he has remade the Republican Party in a. He's really taken off the table. We've mentioned this before. Are you for or anti-Trump? Mm-hmm. That's really not an issue now in the Republican Party. Within the Republican Party. Certainly there are plenty of people outside the Republican Party who don't like Trump. So now the issue is actually the issues reflected on some of these debates between the more tech Elon type people and your Steve Bannon people. That's spilling out into the open again with Steve Bannon denouncing Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, it's an interesting debate. I'm more on the Elon Vivek side of this, so it's interesting to see who's going to come out on top. But whoever comes out on top, they're going to be saying nice things about Donald Trump.
Probably so.
Well, we've got a lot more rising to get to today. We'll be looking at the Pete Hegseth confirmation hearings and a bunch of other exciting subjects. Stay tuned.
The Department of Justice has released Special Counsel Jack Smith's much-anticipated report into the events after the 2020 election. That report concludes that there was enough evidence to convict the president-elect of serious crimes. The only reason he escaped a trial is that he won the presidency. Let that sink in. In short, he got away with it, all of it. Smith's report underscores Trump's penchant for bullying and intimidation to get what he wants. It also says that, quote, the through line of all of Mr. Trump's criminal efforts was deceit, end quote. Trump's 2024 election victory in effect halted the prosecution. And that decision, based on a long-time DOJ policy, came after the Supreme Court ruled in July 2024 that any president enjoys broad immunity from prosecution. Back to Smith. His report reads, quote, indeed, but for Mr. Trump's election and imminent return to the presidency, the office assessed that the admissible evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial.
The 145-page report accuses Trump of plotting to obstruct the collection and certification of votes after his 2020 defeat by President Joe Biden. The DOJ delivered the report to Congress after midnight on Tuesday. Now, Smith first brought charges against Trump in 2023, June, for his efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election. In August of 2023, a grand jury indicted the former president.
The report says that the president-elect, quote, inspired his supporters to commit acts of physical violence on January the 6th, 2021. And Smith wrote, quote, the claim from Mr. Trump that my decisions as a prosecutor were influenced or directed by the Biden administration or other political actors is, in a word, laughable, end quote. The report also highlighted testimony when Trump allegedly privately admitted to losing to Biden in 2020, reportedly telling an aide, can you believe I lost to that effing guy? Trump criticized the report in a 1 a.m. post on Truth Social, writing, Jack is a lame-brained prosecutor who was unable to get his case tried before the election, which I won in a landslide. The voters have spoken.
Yeah, I think his framing here is just utterly ridiculous. His framing being Jack Smith's is his claim, Trump would be a convicted felon if not for him winning the presidential election. Okay, you have to prove this. Just because you put together a report that says, well, it's so obvious to me he's guilty of all these crimes which to my mind, again, I'm reading from the report now. Mr. Trump's false claims include dozens of specific claims regarding to certain states. It's all about claims. It's all about things he said. It's all about words he used, his free speech rights. You can disagree with the things that Trump said. I certainly disagree with the things Trump said. You can think that he's not fit to be president because of that, and you could have voted against him. And in fact, they impeached him over it. The proper mechanism was exercised. What Jack Smith has failed to do is demonstrate, let alone prove, and now he's acting like, oh, it's an open and shut, done case. He would have had to prove it, that Trump's conviction, his tweets, his things he said, again, I'm not defending them, I don't agree with them, but that they were crimes. And that's what the difficulty was going to be, that these are speech-related matters and we have protections for speech, even speech you don't like or think is wrong or think is uncomfortable.
That's just not quite accurate in my opinion, Robby, because if you go back to the original indictment from Jack Smith, he is at pains to point out that it is true that Trump had the right to say things that were false, even if he knew them to be false, in an effort to overturn the election, but that the indictment does in fact pertain to actions taken, for example, promoting fake slates of electors, putting pressure upon members of Congress, or putting pressure on the Department of Justice to conduct sham investigations and so forth. It's just not true to say that this is purely about speech. Now, as for the claim that this would secure a conviction, of course Jack Smith, as the prosecutor, is going to say that it was, that he believes he had enough evidence to win the case. That's his role as a prosecutor. Of course it would be up to the courts and a jury to adjudicate that, and that, Mr. Trump, like any defendant, would have had the right to defend himself and to try to rebut that case, and has the right, in a criminal legal sense, to the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. But that process, that moment, was never arrived at because Trump was able to successfully delay and kick the can down the road on this legal case. And he won the election, and we won the election fair and square. No one disputes that. And then that means that he just can get to discontinue criminal cases against him, which is where the problem arises.
He won the impeachment vote. He won in that the Supreme Court said a lot of the actions he's taken as president are off the table, and he won the election. There were so many ways in which the collective judgment of a high-level legal experts for the Supreme Court, a judicial body, are elected congressional representatives that could have faced consequences for failing to remove him from office, and then the ultimate consequence of him being elected. And the American people just don't agree, or did not think this is disqualifying on some level. The conviction by this one man that again, I think not good statements Trump made about the election, not correct, rose to a criminal matter is not the collective judgment of the American people.
Well, it was the collective judgment of the people who issued the indictment, who sat on the grand jury.
Yeah, haven't you heard the thing about the ham sandwich?
But I mean, you can use that argument on any case in the world.
I would happily use that case in a lot of the tremendous power prosecutors to bring bullshit charges.
A jury never got to decide the matter. Maybe you're right. Maybe it would have gone before a jury. Trump would have had, I'm sure, a very high-powered legal team to defend him against the allegation of criminality. The problem is he never faced the allegation of criminality before a jury. It was never permitted to come before a jury of his peers to decide the matter. And you are now declaring his innocence. I mean,
well, he is innocent because he was not found guilty. Look, there are also, I should clarify, there are aspects of these cases against Trump that I find more plausible than others. I don't think it's all the same. I think from a legal standpoint, for instance, the Georgia case was somewhat strong because they were pointing to more tangible actions. In the Jack Smith case, if you had stripped out some of this, I might have said you would have had a stronger case. But this is the part where it really just loses me. You're right. Some of the conversations with state officials, maybe you prove actions beyond words, but the inclusion of the stuff on the day of January 6th really poisons the whole thing for me, because on that, it's all about how outraged they were that he wasn't tweeting in Mike Pence's defense. Again, you can say that's bad. You can say that's not presidential conduct, but that is just not a crime to fail to come to Mike Pence's defense. He was not charged with inciting a riot because he did. You can say morally responsible. You can say disqualified from the presidency. Congress tried to do that and didn't vote to remove him from office on that basis. But when I see in the report over and over again, he tweeted, he said, it's just about condemnations on his actions the day of, which is not a crime to me.
But you're making it sound as if he was charged with incitement, which he actually was not charged with. He was charged with defrauding the United States by trying to put forth an attempt to overturn an election, and with denial of rights, because had his side prevailed in this scheme that he launched, it would have thwarted the democratically expressed wishes of the people who had voted for President Biden. Now, the point about that is, it is valid within that general argument to make the point that when there were threats to hang Mike Pence, or when Mike Pence was endangered, Trump did not intervene. The point is not that simply the failure to intervene to save Mike Pence was a crime. The point is the failure to do it buttresses the case that the overall quest was to overturn the election result.
I think that, again, the defenders of Trump will say that gives away the game when it's really an attempt to hold Trump criminally liable for the actions of the rioters on the day of January 6th, because there's so much in here, still in this report, about Trump's movements day of January 6th, including gathering evidence that they gathered about his who had written a draft tweets on his phone, all that kind of thing, which just so involves speech to me rather than actions, and I draw a very clear differentiator there.
I actually don't think that's fair.
Okay.
So I think that there is the things that were the subject of criminal prosecution were actions, not words.
Tell us what you think. We'll be back. We have good debate as always. Lots more to come on Rising today. Stay tuned. TikTok in the US just got a whole lot more interesting.
Apparently, Chinese officials are discussing whether to try selling TikTok to tech billionaire and ex-owner Elon Musk. People familiar with the matter said that to Bloomberg.
The Chinese officials would prefer if the Supreme Court did not uphold the TikTok ban. If that fails, Musk could be the other option.
There's no consensus among the officials about how exactly to proceed, but one situation they are talking about is having Musk run X and TikTok together, according to those people familiar with the matter.
The Chinese officials are discussing ways to work with Trump's incoming administration, the people familiar said. One of those ways involves Elon. A ByteDance representative told Bloomberg, "We can't comment on pure fiction." Elon Musk has also not weighed in on the matter.
Musk has met with Chinese officials before. Some even praised him in 2023 over Tesla being a successful model. Attorney and author Seth Abramson took to Blue Sky and wrote, according to the Wall Street Journal, the Chinese Communist Party sees Elon Musk as a trusted partner who can be relied upon to steer TikTok in a direction the CCP would be okay with, which I suppose is the clearest indication we have ever had that Elon Musk is a danger to the United States.
Entrepreneur Alex Finn praised the idea on X, writing, "This makes so much sense. For years, Elon has been pushing X to be a video-first platform. In fact, a short-form video tab is mere weeks from buying TikTok for pennies on the dollar and instantly having a library of video content on that would be a game changer." There's another high-profile figure who has expressed interest in buying the app, however.
Here's Kevin O'Leary last night on Jesse Waters.
We put our bid in knowing that we're not serving anybody. We're going to make this a people's platform with equity crowdfunding, allowing people on TikTok to own a piece of it, beholden to no one social media site that exists today. So look, I'm a huge Elon Musk fan. I mean, no question about it. You know, he's a phenomenal entrepreneur. But the idea that the regulator, even under Trump's administration, would allow this, pretty slim.
So this is very interesting. TikTok will go extinct in the U.S. in a few days unless the Supreme Court intervenes or a private business interest like Elon Musk or Kevin O'Leary intervene. So TikTok is in some jeopardy. The Supreme Court hearings on Friday, I listened to them, wrote about them. They did not go well for TikTok. Now, I am very against banning TikTok because I think it violates the First Amendment rights of Americans to consume this content. I do take seriously the national security implications of an app that is so closely monitored or involved with Chinese authoritarians. I'm not discounting national security problems. I'm not discounting that they can influence the algorithm and do propaganda. That's all true. I would still say it's free speech. Can't ban it. Now, and the Supreme Court is very ardently pro-free speech in general. Where TikTok got in trouble from listening to the oral arguments is that they seem to say, well, this is not against TikTok. This action, which requires ByteDance to sell TikTok or be banned, is an action against ByteDance, and ByteDance is not an American company, so is not protected under the First Amendment. The government has greater leeway to do whatever it wants, so Congress can, in fact, they couldn't ban TikTok, but they can require ByteDance to sell TikTok if it wants to operate in the U.S. That seemed to be where a majority, like most of the justices were, so I am expecting a negative ruling for TikTok, which would mean that in order to stay operational here, it would need to be sold off. So Kevin O'Leary has said him and some billionaire friends would buy it. They would buy it without the algorithm and would reconstitute an algorithm, so that would be one solution. Now, Elon Musk is being speculated and has even though I'm a big Elon Musk fan, he has a not combative relationship with the Chinese Communist Party, which is maybe not ideal. So that's kind of where we stand. I think it would be hilarious. Remember that Democrats, Biden, initiated this TikTok order. I think it would be hilarious if the end result of them taking action against TikTok was that Elon Musk gets to turn another social media site into what he's done with X. That would not make them too happy.
I think that it is, I am not as much of an Elon Musk fan as you are by any stretch of the imagination. I get the trolling element of it, but I do think that there are actually very genuine concerns if he did buy TikTok. on the idea that he would then own both TikTok and X, obviously. And, you know, in the digital media age or new or social media age, I think there is just as much validity to concerns about concentration of ownership as there would be to somebody owning, you know, 75 newspapers in the old days or whatever. I do think that having that much social media power being funneled through one man is very, very dangerous, and I would be against it purely on that
Sure,
basis.
but this would then be a case of government intervention causing that reality, right? If Elon Musk or some other media billionaire was to purchase this app and do consolidation of media, this would be an example of the government manifesting a monopoly kind of thing, where if they just left it alone, it would be in the hands of different ownership. But because they've intervened, there's consolidation in the market. It's a really good example of unintentional consequences.
No, I think that's a fair point. And I'm not particularly hostile to your free speech argument, because if it were banned, which seems quite likely barring a development like this, it isn't purely about bite dance in the sense of, oh, their rights are being abridged, as you point out. They're a foreign company.
They don't have rights, that's fine.
Yeah, exactly. But there are obviously a very large number of Americans who have monetized TikTok, who have built up very significant followings on it, who are at least in part dependent upon it for their income. And if that right is taken away from them, I think there is legitimate reason to be skeptical of that. And, you know, we have spoken about the proposed TikTok ban quite a lot, and I think we've often mentioned the fact that there are figures on the right who are opposed to it from very similar standpoints to yourself, kind of libertarian free speech grounds. There are also people like AOC who are opposed to a ban because they feel that, I guess, the broader argument about data privacy or tech power is kind of getting lost in a sort of red scare about the Chinese, as opposed to the bigger picture of how one protects or balances the rights of individual citizens.
Yeah, I think there's some validity to that. The case before the Supreme Court on Friday was actually two separate legal arguments, one on behalf of ByteDance, which didn't go well at all, and then one on behalf of creators on the platform that I think were able to make more compelling arguments, because the end result of this will be like that Apple, that the iPhone store, that's a private company, an American company, it has First Amendment rights, can't put this app, which you, a user of the iPhone, a customer, want to have. This is like a private transaction, a speech-related private transaction between American consumers and an American company that is being abrogated by this congressional law concerning TikTok. So that's where I'd say, where even if ByteDance doesn't have First Amendment rights, the First Amendment is still being infringed upon. And I was happy to hear, you mentioned Red Scare type stuff, Elena Kagan brought that up, that a lot of the arguments that the government is making against TikTok were being made against the Communist Party in America going back 50 and 100 years, and we now look pretty disfavorably toward that. I was also glad to hear Gorsuch bring up the problem that what motivated Congress to take this action against TikTok was intelligence shared with them by national security experts that has not been made public. And Gorsuch pointed out that it's kind of not ideal to be making your case for this based on secret information that the people arguing against you in this case have not been able to see. That's not fair at all.
And related to that point, there are a number of people, I think, across the political spectrum who have concerns that the actual opposition to TikTok is partly born of the kind of arguments or news or stuff that one sees there. And sometimes that can seem a bit conspiratorial, but then Mitt Romney, of all people, when he was still in the Senate, popped up last year sometime, basically saying there's all this pro-Palestinian news on it and that's a bad thing. Now, that's a topic we'll get into later in today's show. The Palestinians, I mean, not Mitt Romney. We're not talking about Mitt Romney anymore.
Not much Romney news to.
But the idea that TikTok is being targeted partly because people don't like the information it provides access to, I think that's an interesting one too.
Right, and then there's some people make like the harms to children arguments or the addictiveness. That's not a TikTok specific thing whatsoever. Even if it is true, and we debate the validity of that. I've had a lot of arguments with Jonathan Haidt, who is the main promoter of that idea that we need less smartphone interactions among young people. Look, I think it has some validity. I certainly think keeping them out of schools is fine, but there's nothing TikTok specific about that. the data, they're getting all, every company is getting your data. They can buy your data if they weren't getting it this way. So we'll have to see. But I know a lot of people will be disappointed. And Kevin O'Leary did say that in his interview, that what you said, this is something that small businesses, individuals use to monetize content, and it would be a tremendous economic loss and shame if it went away.
Absolutely.
Which is why they hope a sale is able to happen. I'm hopeful a sale is able to happen just so that people can still continue to use it, but I wish they were not in this position. More Rising right after this.
California Democrats have made a deal to help Trump-proof the blue state. They've agreed to stash $50 million for any potential legal fights with the incoming Trump administration. $25 million of that will be for the state DOJ to fund potential court battles with the federal government. The other half will be to defend illegal immigrants from deportation, detention, and wage theft. That's something Politico first reported.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis called for a special legislative session to prepare for Trump's deportation plans. Here's part of what he said.
So why would we want to twiddle our thumbs when we know that this is a major initiative? This is probably the most significant initiative, domestic initiative, that the new administration is going to do. So we need to be ready. And everybody who's in law enforcement, state and local, they need to know you have responsibilities to help facilitate this important interest for our country. We'll provide you funding for it, but you got to be on the team here. And I think you need to do that on day one.
DeSantis also had a message for those who refuse to properly perform their duties in regards to mass deportation.
On the head of a natural disaster, you got people that come here without authorization and they go out and try to loot the place. Give me a break. Those people need to be sent back immediately. So this will end up helping the overall situation, even apart from immigration. Now, the accountability is significant. If those duties are clear in law, I have the authority with respect to certain officials to suspend them from their office if they are neglecting their duties. And that's a authority that I have invoked when it's been appropriate in the past.
Florida Senate President Ben Albritton and House Speaker Daniel Perez, both Republicans, wrote a joint letter Monday criticizing DeSantis' call for a special session. The letter reads in part, "It is completely irresponsible to get out ahead of any announcements President Trump will make, especially when uninformed or ill-timed state action could potentially impair or impede the success of President Trump's forthcoming efforts to end illegal immigration, close our borders, and protect the sovereignty of our nation." Democratic Florida State Congresswoman Anna Eskamani took to Blue Sky and commented on the letter, writing, "Nice when there are those rare bipartisan moments where we can all agree that Governor DeSantis is wrong."
Some on the right, however, praise DeSantis. Town hall writer Scott Moorfield wrote on X, "I don't think Trump was bluffing about his deportation intentions, but if he was, Ron DeSantis is calling that bluff. This is the platform that won the election, and setting the expectation that Trump keep his own promises is a brilliant political strategy." Claremont Institute fellow David Riaboy once again writes this, "Once again, DeSantis leads every red state, should do something similar, not only on immigration, but on every issue." They clearly ran on some level of deportations at least. I don't think there should be mass deportations of otherwise law-abiding citizens, but there is clearly a desire in this country of the American people. Trump couldn't have been clearer that that's what he was running on, to do something about excessive illegal immigration. And, if Gavin Newsom is going to stockpile funds to have the state represent illegal immigrant defendees, that doesn't seem like the most politically savvy use of taxpayer dollars. Haven't we all decided that the states don't get to just do whatever they want when it comes to immigration? That red states that tried to have stricter border enforcement than the national government policy got told, no, you can't do that because immigration is a national issue. I guess I don't know why it should be any different here.
So in relation to the immigration issue, I think we are in agreement that it is a federal issue rather than a states issue. But I think, as I understand the Newsom proposal, it is to defend immigrants on an individualized basis if there is an argument that, I don't know, they have not got due process or whatever. The other point, just before we get back to DeSantis, but on the Newsom point, the $25 million to fund the state Department of Justice to fight Trump seems to me completely normal. There has been enormous efforts by Republican attorneys general to defy or to block the Biden agenda. This is something that states do all the time. And I was relatedly sorry I wasn't here the past couple of days to fight with you over the California wildfire politics, because I think there's a lot of really dubious stuff being put out there. I have seen this move of Newsom's being cast as like, oh, they've 25 million to fund legal challenges to Trump and not fight the wildfires. That's just such a nonsense argument to me. I mean, that's not, it's irrelevant to the wildfire question whether they're going to get 25 million to fight, to put into their legal fund to fight against Trump, as they have a right to do, in my view.
Yeah, I guess that's not the most persuasive criticism. I mean, I think it's perfectly acceptable to criticize Gavin Newsom, and especially Karen Bass, for wildfires-related stuff. I mean, the whole city is ablaze, and it's under Democratic governance, so on some level there was a failure. And
no, mate, the whole city was ablaze. It's under Democrat. I mean, I'm sure, you know, that's like saying there's a tornado in Texas. It's under Republican governance.
Well, okay, but they're supposed to be preparing for these eventualities, and it's the first fire that's ever taken place.
Well, I'm glad we're going to get into our fight about the wildfires. So look,
I mean, my views are not that strong, but
go
off.
It's just that I think that there is a lot of demagoguery around the actual facts of the case. Karen Bass cut the fire department budget at most by about 2 to 3%. This notion of Gavin Newsom and the smelt fish is just completely irrelevant to any form of either firefighting or irrigation in the Los Angeles area. At most, that was to do with moving water from Northern California to the Central Valley. But look, my whole argument on the wildfires is, if a large-scale wildfire breaks out and there are winds of around almost 100 miles an hour, that means you can't put aircraft up. You're automatically in deep trouble as soon as that happens. There is no municipal system anywhere in the United States that can fight wildfires from fire hydrants. That isn't possible. And in order to make it possible, you would have to spend an astronomical amount of money on infrastructure that would mostly be redundant, because most of the time we aren't fighting catastrophic wildfires.
Yeah, I somehow think that if Republicans were in charge here, there would be plenty of bashing how they are handling it from mainstream media people and Democratic figures, and we would hear actually we're hearing this already, right, about how polluting corporations or something are killing the planet, and Elon Musk, etc. type people have blood on their hands for allowing the climate crisis. In fact, I'm hearing that right now. So there's plenty of politicizing of tragedy, and now we're complaining we can't do that. This is the first time ever it's not been allowed.
There's certainly politicizing of tragedy, and I don't necessarily see why the president-elect referring to Governor Newsom as new scum helps anybody. But my broader point is, a lot of the decisions that were made are kind of red herrings. The situation through the awesome forces of nature, awesome in a terrifying sense, made it very difficult to counteract. And what Gavin Newsom thinks about the smelt fish, or whether Karen Bass was in Ghana or Glendale, totally irrelevant.
But Karen Bass, look, it wasn't going to stop the fire from happening, but Karen Bass said, the New York Times even called her out for this. She said she was not going to travel internationally, that she was just going to go to D.C. or Sacramento or something, and she's repeatedly traveled out of the country, including to for the Olympic Games of some kind. And she explicitly made a promise she wasn't going to do that she broke.
I mean, if we want to make the specific argument that Karen
Bass
is traveling more than she promised, okay, let's criticize Karen Bass for traveling more than she promised. But the notion that there is a correlation, some sort of umbilical cord connecting her being in Ghana to the response to the wildfires, I think is specious at best.
Did you see the video about the DEI firefighters?
I did not, but I'm sure you watched it eagerly.
I don't even know if we want to
go there.
Want to open this.
But this is the fire chief who criticised Bass also criticised from the right for being some kind of diversity hire, essentially.
Yes, for a video. The problem with the video, and look, whoever is most qualified to do the job, if a woman has the physical strength, whatever the requirements are, that's perfectly fine with me. But the video talks about how a person might be if they're wondering, could you carry me out of a burning building in a fire, and it says in the video, well, it's your fault for getting yourself in that situation in the first place. It's just like a very weird line in this video promoting the DEI ability. Like, no, you're supposed to assure me that you're capable of doing this job, and then I'd be like, fine. But what you're kind of conceding is that you can, and it's my fault for being in a fire. But you're right that fire chief is now going after Karen Bass, I think, to deflect attention from that video. So there's a little bit of coordination going on.
Exactly, a lot of finger pointing going on.
Well, up next, MSNBC is turning to a familiar face to try and save their ratings. You know that face. It's Rachel Maddow. We'll talk about it. Stay tuned. Guess who's back? Back again. Rachel Maddow's back. Tell a friend, because she will be returning to MSNBC 5 nights a week for the first 100 days of Trump's administration.
Can't you just sense Robby's excitement? Now, after that, Maddow will go back to hosting only on Mondays after April 30th, and Alex Wagner will take over from there. Maddow spoke to USA Today about the new move. She said, things are going to change. We're already seeing the freneticism of the Trump news cycle taking over, even during the transition. We're seeing the unpredictable cadence of the way news breaks, as opposed to a more competent, rational administration. So we'll see. We're trying to be ready for anything, and that's part of why we're making this change for the first 100 days.
MSNBC's ratings had been plummeting since Trump's win in November.
Compared to Maddow's November and December average, however, the network said the show's audience last Monday was up 20%.
Investigative reporter at the Washington Free Beacon, Chuck Ross, wrote on X, first Jen Rubin quits WAPO, and now Rachel Maddow announces she will work 5 days a week instead of her usual one. A great day for democracy. Post-millennial editor-in-chief Libby Emmons says, whatever did we do for MSNBC to give us such a gift? And in other media news, the Washington Post readership has declined by almost 90% from 2021 to 2024, according to internal data shared with Semaphore. In January 2021, the Post had 22.5 million readers. By mid-2024, that number cratered to around 3 million. The Washington Post also laid off about 100 staffers last week.
Vox was another media outlet that also laid off employees last week.
So let's start with the Maddow of it, and then I have some thoughts on those abysmal numbers for WAPO and Vox.
Well, I would be a defender of Rachel Maddow. We began today's show with a conversation with Jennifer Rubin, of whom I am not a fan. And Jennifer Rubin and Rachel Maddow have, I suppose, broadly similar views. And I would defend Maddow on the basis that I think she authentically believes what she says. I don't think she is a fraud or a grifter. I think that lots of people will disagree with what she says. I'm not attributing those qualities to Jen Rubin either, incidentally. I just find the way she has transformed herself kind of off-putting. But in Maddow's case, look, she is a progressive, liberal voice. She has been one now for many years on MSNBC. She's clearly their biggest draw by far in the ratings. The ratings go down when she's not on. None of the other shows around her can make up that deficit. She did sign a new contract previously, and it allowed her to have this reduced schedule of one night a week where she gets to work on podcasts and other things. I'm not going to say I watch her show every night, even when she is on 5 nights a week. I don't, but good luck to her.
Yeah, I think this is a good business decision for MSNBC. I mean, it's really on her terms. I'm sure they would like her to regularly work every night because she is the network's biggest draw. It's her choice to work less, and she gets sick of doing it, and I actually find that very humanizing and appreciate it about her. I agree that she's talented. I've had a lot of, and I similarly would not put her in the same category as Jen Rubin. I've had a lot of disagreements with her, particularly relating to, I think she exaggerated and overhyped the Russia stuff considerably. Her show had at the fever pitch of that, a sort of inevitability to the criminal charges of Trump for Russia stuff, that if you watched, it was like watching some thriller, and a lot of that did not materialize, and again, I would argue was not that the Russians didn't try to interfere, but it exaggerated the level of Russian influence actually mattering in terms of how it went down. That's not a criticism unique to me. Though a lot of people have had that to say. A lot of left people have had that to say.
Well, exactly. I mean, just to break in on that point, Matt Taibbi, sometimes I agree with and sometimes I disagree with quite strongly. But my recollection is that Taibbi was actually very good on that issue and calling out not just her, but voices on the left generally who had sort of overhyped the Russia stuff. And, you know, he did that from the perspective of someone who certainly at one point would have been very much identified himself with a more progressive stance.
Yes, Glenn Greenwald as well. All right, let's move on to just the greater chaos in the media sphere. So look,
those post numbers are terrible.
They're terrible. Yeah. Now the framing is, oh, this is what happens after you don't endorse Kamala Harris and you tick off all your liberal readers. But this collapse was happening well before that. What I guess that we're seeing reflected here is something you and I have talked about privately, and also probably on camera as well, the Facebook change, the Facebook of it all. From 2010 to 2019, 2020-ish, Facebook was a massive driver of web traffic to the news websites themselves. A link would go viral on the news feed, and that would actually send readers back to the website itself. So it was really good for traffic for places like the Washington Post, the New York Times, probably thehill.com as well. I didn't work here in that time period. This is something that everybody in media has experienced, a drop-off in social media-derived traffic that has impacted that distribution model and has caused media companies to look at things like, how do we grow on YouTube? Right. How do we host native video on the site? So there's lots of different strategies that we've adapted as a result of that. So that's probably what you're seeing. Now, those are particularly bad numbers, but I know there are conservative sites that lost like 90% of their traffic from 2018 to now for similar reasons.
Right. I think Breitbart, I seem to recall having a very, very precipitous drop in traffic. But look, it is pretty catastrophic for any news organization to lose 90% of its readers. I would agree that Facebook is certainly part of that. But it has to be, I think, a broader problem. Now, of course, there is always the phenomenon where news organizations in any form of media gain when there is very dramatic news and lose when the news becomes less dramatic. And some of those Washington Post figures, I think, the high point was from, I believe, January 2021, which was January the 6th and all of that, a real crisis moment in America, and you know we have different perspectives on it, but it plainly drove a lot of news.
Well, and the COVID news bump, everybody being forced to stay at home, and also people just searching for information on an epidemic, you know, things we all learn a lot more about epidemiology. I mean, like all of us as human beings on the earth than we knew 5 years ago. There was just a boost in news topics that I think the post-Facebook collapse of news would have happened much more rapidly, except for this unique confluence of global events, global and American events that caused a real boost in news interest that masked some of how the social media collapse was really going to change the industry.
Sure, and I do think, although I respect a lot of the reporting the Post does, but I do also think it moved a few notches further than, say, the New York Times did in terms of Trump, not exactly trolling, but headlines and stories that were plainly tailored to appeal to an anti-Trump audience. And then he wasn't the president anymore, and the salience of that or the usefulness of that obviously declined. Now, I'm not saying that's why they lost 90% of their readership. That obviously has a multiplicity of causes. But, you know, much as CNN on the TV side had done a somewhat similar thing under the Jeff Zucker regime, it had become sort of somewhat trollish and then had to recalibrate from that. So, you know, look, I think the Post is still a great American journalistic institution. I would not like to see it be in really dire straits, but those numbers are very bad.
Yeah. These are also just gigantic organizations. I mean, you can cut 100 people and there's still like a lot of people left to continue the business of running the newspaper. I mean, that shows that these massive media companies really grew during good times, and then are in a difficult situation of having so many employees and no longer having the revenue to justify those circumstances.
Not a lean and mean machine.
Exactly. Right. Not like us. Well, we've got a lot more to get into today. Up next, We're taking a page out of Niall's notebook, finding out what he has to say is Biden's biggest failure. I have a guess for what it is, but I'm going to find out too. Stay tuned. Niall, what's in your notebook today?
Well, I had the day off from Rising yesterday, Robby, and I put my time to rather dubious use. I went to the State Department to see President Biden deliver one of the final speeches of his presidency, this one dedicated to a defense of his foreign policy. The president insisted that thanks in part to those policies, the United States is winning the worldwide competition, as he put it. Biden defended the withdrawal from Afghanistan, his support for Ukraine, and how he had managed the US relationship with China. The president spoke for almost a half hour, but he took no questions. And that was a shame because I certainly have plenty, specifically about Israel and the Palestinians, and the moral stain that conflict has left on the Biden presidency. Now, I'll get to the news of the day in a moment, but first the big picture. Since the heinous Hamas attacks of October 7, 2023, in which around 1,200 Israelis were killed, Israel has laid waste to Gaza. More than 46,000 Palestinians have been killed, according to the local health ministry. Around 90% of the population has been displaced. The humanitarian situation, including dire shortages of food, shelter and sanitation, is by any reasonable standards a catastrophe. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, along with former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, stands accused by the International Criminal Court of being a war criminal. This has all happened with the full support of the Biden administration, which provided almost $18 billion in military aid during the first year of the conflict alone. The president himself often cites his ironclad commitment to Israel. So, Biden says we are now finally on the brink of a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. We're pressing hard to close this, he said at the State Department yesterday. This is a story in flux. Right now, no deal has been announced. Maybe by the time you're watching, there will be one. So far, we know only the general, unconfirmed contours of a possible agreement. But there is one unexpected twist, and it's the suggestion that Donald Trump, of all people, might be due some credit for applying pressure to Netanyahu. That's surprising, coming from a president-elect whose threats that there will be hell to pay in the absence of a ceasefire deal had been seen as a threat toward Hamas and the broader Palestinian population. But let's look at the evidence. In Israel, a columnist for the Haaretz newspaper, Chaim Levinson, has just published a piece headlined, "Trump's Mideast envoy forced Netanyahu to accept a Gaza plan he repeatedly rejected." Levinson notes the aggressive role reportedly played by Trump Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, and he also quotes the consternation of Netanyahu supporters. One Netanyahu booster lamented of Trump, "All his people have been lying. It's a big disappointment." Another contends, quote, "The pressure Trump is exerting right now is not the kind Israel expected from him." Now, our regular Rising audience knows I have many criticisms of Donald Trump. But if he is putting pressure on Netanyahu to sign up to a ceasefire deal and making the kind of concessions Netanyahu had previously resisted, good for him. If, and I stress if that is the case, it's another ignominious moment for Biden. The outgoing president has failed to check Netanyahu in any meaningful way, as the bodies have piled up on a scale scarcely imaginable. Indeed, Biden's record has truly scandalous elements. Just this past weekend, CBS's 60 Minutes, to its credit, carried an explosive report featuring interviews with former State Department officials who resigned, largely over Biden's Israel policy. One said she was berated for daring to present images showing children that were starving to death, an outrage in which she believed the Biden administration was complicit. Another said there was, quote, "no debate or discussion over Israeli requests for weapons transfers." And a third was asked by CBS's Cecilia Vega whether Biden really had any red lines over Israel's conduct. Let's listen to some of that.
What's the message the U.S. has sent to the Netanyahu government?
I believe the message that Prime Minister Netanyahu received is that he was the one in the driver's seat, and he was controlling this.
Biden will be out the door in less than a week, but the worst elements of his Israel policy won't be forgotten. This doesn't mean that Trump will be consistently better or will worry overmuch about the right of the Palestinians, but let's give some credit where it's due. In diplomacy, even small things matter. That Haaretz column I mentioned earlier opened with an anecdote. It told of how Trump's envoy last Friday informed aides to Netanyahu that he would be arriving in Israel the following day. Those aides reportedly told Witkoff, who is incidentally Jewish, that the Israeli Prime Minister would not meet him until Shabbat was over. According to Haaretz, quote, Witkoff's blunt reaction took them by surprise. He explained to them in salty English that Shabbat was of no interest to him. Netanyahu took the meeting without delay. It all recalls a famous moment from a generation ago. Back in 1996, then President Bill Clinton met Netanyahu for the first time. Afterwards, Clinton's reaction was widely reported as follows, quote, who the F does he think he is? Who's the effing superpower here? Now, I don't have much faith in Donald Trump having any enduring principles, but if he or his envoy remind Mr. Netanyahu who the superpower is, they'll have at least done something. Something that President Biden, the self-proclaimed champion of human rights, has failed so shamefully to do at all.
Yeah, I'm glad to see you acknowledge it, although I'm not at all surprised because you're a very fair-minded person, that it looks like very speculative. We don't know for sure. A deal has not been reached, but what we're hearing is that Donald Trump's representatives did exert some pressure on Netanyahu's government to agree to a deal that he previously did not want and that his more conservative coalition partners absolutely oppose. That is good because this, as you point out, needs to come to an end. It's just a horrific massacre of thousands of innocent people. It's awful. Many of the American people are scandalized by it and don't want to participate in it. And Donald Trump, for all his bluster on a variety of subjects, has never been an interventionist nation builder, has been very critical of neoconservatives, has been ironclad in his support for Israel's right to exist, but made comments that he wanted this ended because he doesn't think it's good. And he has, if this is true and accurate, he has done what most other presidents, Republican and Democrat, were willing to do previously, which is draw certain support for Israel, a right to defend itself, right to retaliate against terrorist groups, but up to a point at which we're not having World War III and you have to back down from there. Every president has done that except Joe Biden.
Yeah, which is extraordinary. And if you look at the coverage in the Israeli media, it is striking how much of it is about the pressure that they believe has been placed on their side by Trump. Now, I mentioned in my notes there that I'm critical of Trump in all sorts of ways, as you're well aware. But that element of bringing some pressure to bear has been really amazingly lacking during Biden's conduct or policy during this whole disaster. And I think it has been really to everyone's detriment, including, I might add, the sort of global position of Israel, which has been absolutely lambasted for understandable reasons because it has been such a brutal and prolonged assault.
Yeah, I agree. And also the standing of the U.S., it seems hard to reach a conclusion other than President Biden was not properly respected or feared or did not draw those lines with allies and adversaries. That raises questions about the cognitive fitness. Is it in conversations he seems like a man you can cross because maybe he's not all there at all times? There's some really consequential foreign policy that is in the domain of the executive, that this is not necessarily something you outsource to the rest of the team. His advisors are taking his cues, and we've had this policy that there's commonality between right and left in agreeing that it was just giving Israel a total free hand to destroy the entire Gaza Strip was catastrophically inhumane, or whatever way you want to describe it. And so I'm truly glad, if it's coming to an end, that will include the release of the hostages, which is essential, and we very much hope to see that.
For sure.
Up next, Trump's choice for Secretary of Defense is defending himself before Congress. That's Pete Hegseth. We will look at those hearings. Pete Hegseth is one step closer to the Pentagon. President-elect Donald Trump's pick to be the next Secretary of Defense is sitting before the Senate Armed Services Committee, where the senators are considering whether to confirm him.
Hegseth has been under intense scrutiny since being nominated in November because there were allegations of sexual misconduct around him.
Hegseth's mother had written an email to her son in 2018 accusing him of mistreating women, but she later defended him in a Fox and Friends interview and said the email, which was then obtained and published by the New York Times, had been sent in haste. She says that Hegseth is a redeemed and changed man today.
Trump also stood by his pick after the allegations surfaced.
In his opening statement, Hegseth said he hopes to build a warrior culture, making the case that having an untraditional background from secretaries of years past is actually an asset.
There was an eventful interruption to the proceedings, however. Let's watch.
Members of the security force will remove members.
Democratic Senator Jack Reed grilled Hegseth on his past DEI comments.
Let's listen.
However, the DEI policies of today are not the same as what happened back then. They're dividing troops inside formations, causing commanders to walk on eggshells, not putting meritocracy first. That's the indictment that's made by those serving right now.
Excuse me.
And why we're having this conversation.
All of your public comments don't talk about meritocracy. They talk about liberal democratic efforts that are destroying the military, that those people are our enemies. That's not meritocracy. That's a political view. And your goal, as I see emerging, is to politicize the military in favor of your particular positions, which you've outlined extensively, which would be the worst blow to the professionalism of the United States military.
Things got a little more heated when New Hampshire Senator Jeanne Shaheen got her turn.
Shaheen asked Hegseth why his comments on women in the military seemed to be contradictory.
And you say that women are not competent, they make our military less effective. And on the other hand, you say, oh no, now that I've been nominated to be the Secretary of Defense, I've changed my view on women in the military. What do you have to say to the almost 400,000 women who are serving today about your position on whether they should be capable to rise through the highest ranks of our military?
Senator, I would say I would be honored to have the opportunity to serve alongside you, shoulder to shoulder, men and women, black, white, all backgrounds, with a shared purpose. Our differences are not what define us. Our unity and our shared purpose is what define us, and you will be treated fairly and with dignity, honor, and respect.
Hegseth further clarified his views on women in combat when Senator Tom Cotton was questioning him.
Let's listen.
Let me read a quote here from one Army officer. While it may be difficult for a 120-pound woman to lift or drag 250 pounds, the Army cannot artificially absolve women of that responsibility. It may still exist on the battlefield. The entire purpose of creating a gender-neutral test was to acknowledge the reality that each job has objective physical standards to which all soldiers should be held, regardless of gender. The intent was not to ensure that women and men will have an equal likelihood of meeting those standards. I assume, based on your testimony, you agree with that Army officer?
Absolutely. The standards need to be the same, and they need to be high. And they need to be set by the people closest to the problem set, closest to the understanding of what is required by that job.
Well, it sounds to me like he's addressing that criticism of him. I agree with what he's saying there. There need to be rigorous, important physical standards for whether you serve in combat so that we can be, other people are relying on you, so we can't just have it be, you know, we feel pity for someone and we want to lower the standards and include them. No, they have to be very rigorous standards. And if women can satisfy them, great. There are certainly roles that, and then there are other roles besides serving in combat. You can still serve your country in a non-combat role. There are all sorts of roles associated with it. If women can pass that bar, that's fine. But we're not going to lower that bar so that more women can pass it. Whatever it is determined to be is what it's going to be. I think that's what I agree with. That's what I was hearing from him. I think probably most people think that's reasonable.
They may well think that's reasonable. I do think he has very obviously finessed, at a minimum, his views on women in combat, which he was previously rather emphatically opposed to, and swiftly changed position, or at least modulated that position soon after being nominated, obviously believing that it would endanger his nomination if he held fast to the more incendiary views he previously had. Now, I gather the hearing also included him being asked, and the control room will correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was Senator Ernst who asked him whether he would support her efforts, which were about countering or combating sexual abuse in the military. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand from New York has also worked on that, and Hegseth said he would support that, which is I think,
of course,
praiseworthy and good for him. There are broader debates about Pete Hegseth. We have discussed previously. There's an allegation against him, or was an allegation against him, and he settled a claim from a woman who said he had sexually assaulted her. There were no criminal charges pressed in that case. He says that he settled the case in order to protect his television career. One reason I mention it is, even before today's hearing, we saw Democrats complain that the FBI background check into Hegseth was not as extensive as they believed it should have been. Apparently, one of his ex-wives, I think he's now on a third wife, one of his ex-wives wanted to talk more to the FBI and couldn't get her calls returned, according to one newspaper report this morning. Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut apparently asked today whether Hegseth would be willing to submit to an expanded FBI check, and Hegseth declined to commit to that.
Look, I think he's going to be confirmed with very little problem. The only thing that would indicate that's not going to be the case is if we hear some Republicans still expressing reservations. Joni Ernst had expressed reservations about Hegseth, and I think she got incredibly negative treatment from conservative media. This is someone, I mean, he comes from conservative media, so maybe that's an advantage he has. There was not as much interest in pulling or dragging Matt Gaetz over the finish line. There is interest in dragging Hegseth over the finish line. This is seen by, I think, by Trump and by many in the MAGA movement as a very key role they want filled by this person, and I don't think any Republican senator is going to cross Trump on this. I haven't seen any indication that they will. It could happen. I'd be surprised, and so I think he will. Don't think he'll get any, perhaps zero Democratic support, but he will pass.
Do you think all of Trump's nominees that are still standing will now pass?
Yes, I do think that. I think Matt Gaetz would have had trouble, and so that one, he withdrew. So I don't know if it counts as a thwarted nomination or not. But I think the rest of them are going to get through. RFK Jr. Would be interesting, but I'm mostly hearing because on that one you could theoretically see some Republican support and some Republican lack of support because he's pro-choice, and some of his views on even food and nutrition and the new requirements and regulations are not particularly conservative. And then on the Democratic side, he is a former Democrat and has Democratic friends and a Democratic name, but has also made a lot of enemies with Democrats. So that one will be interesting to watch, but I think it will end up tallying that there will be plenty of votes to approve him. Same with Tulsi, same with Kash Patel, but we'll find out.
Yeah, we will. I mean, Gabbard to me is also, Tulsi Gabbard's a very interesting one because I think that she, I've my issues with her positions on some things, but she clearly does not represent what was once the orthodox, Republican, hawkish position. She is a former Democrat, after all.
Yes.
And so I would imagine that there could be a theoretical possibility of splitting off one or two Republicans, but I'm not seeing a concrete sign of it, or much concrete sign of it. And to your point, I think Republicans, even in the Senate, which has been more of a stronghold of Trump skeptics, are reluctant to cross him after he has, won re-election again.
Yes, but we will be paying up close attention to other hearings, and we will check in with those later. Up next, latest bromance is Trump and a popular Democrat, or a Democrat that's popular with non-Democrats. We'll tell you who it is. Stay tuned. Looks like President-elect Donald Trump has a new friend. Democratic Senator John Fetterman visited Mar-a-Lago recently. After their meeting, Trump praised Fetterman, telling the Washington Examiner that it was a totally fascinating meeting. He's a fascinating man, and his wife is lovely. They were both up, and I couldn't be more impressed. He's a common sense person. He's not liberal or conservative. He's just common sense, which is beautiful. Here's Fetterman last week discussing his rationale for visiting.
I demand that I need to be made Pope of Greenland.
Do you have the resume to be Pope?
I'm having a conversation like he's the president, is going to be. So, I am not the senator for just Democrats in Pennsylvania. I'm everyone's senator in Pennsylvania.
Radio host Dean Obeidallah took to Blue Sky and criticized Fetterman's move, writing, "I wish Trump would pick Fetterman for his cabinet so Governor Shapiro could appoint an actual Democrat to fill the seat."
Took to Blue Sky is like taking to your parents' basement or something. Political commentator Rob Smith wrote on X, where the rest of us are, "Conservatives, please stop sharing and platforming people who were stumping for Kamala the Communist 5 minutes ago. I don't want to see Charlemagne or Stephen A. Smith or Bill Maher or John Fetterman or any of the rest. They don't need free PR from us." Well, I obviously don't agree with that because we give them free PR all the time.
What is this Blue Sky slander, though, Robby?
Blue Sky is, you will not find me over on Blue Sky.
You'll find me on Blue Sky.
Are you on Blue Sky?
I am on
yes.
Blue Sky, yes. But
what's the conversation like over on Blue Sky?
I don't think you would feel particularly at home there, for the most part, I have to say.
Yes, indeed.
Jen Rubin would feel very at home there.
Very, very at home there.
Mr. Fetterman. Mr. Fetterman, I am rather skeptical of. I think that there is a theoretical argument to be made for, being civil, being nice, being friendly. But I just think that he has, he's basically Joe Manchin in a hoodie at this stage. It's somebody who isn't really standing up for any great principle. He's just sort of wanting the limelight.
That's what it takes to be a senator in the most politically closely divided state of all 50, Pennsylvania, right? He wants to be, all political figures want to win re-election. He's set himself up better for eventual re-election than any other Democratic senator. He's based and red-pilled. He's liked by a lot of Republicans. His deviations from the Democratic Party have not always been on issues where I even agree with the deviations. He's been so vocally pro-Israel and Netanyahu, which is not really the issue where I would choose to make defection from Democratic Party orthodoxy, but I think it is healthy to have, for the Democratic Party to survive. This is true of the Republican Party too, and sometimes they get into trouble where the MAGA base or the very conservative primary voters expect some candidate who then cannot possibly win a general election. See Carrie Lake over and over again. But the same is true for the Democrats.
Yes, that part is true. I don't disagree with that. I think that the risk in Fetterman's case is you end up in a kind of Manchin-like position where you're not really liked by anybody. Like, it wasn't, Joe Manchin was only respected.
Not liked by anybody except the voters of West Virginia.
Well,
which is Trump plus 90, and he's still winning.
No, I know, but Manchin clearly had ambitions beyond West Virginia, right? And those never really went anywhere. I think in Fetterman's case, yes, the Israel-Palestinian issue is part of it because he appeared at times, in my view, to gloat over Palestinian deaths. But I also think, are Republicans really going to warm up to John Fetterman to the point where they vote for him at any point? I'm highly skeptical of that.
But Pennsylvania is so close. It's not. You're right. Republicans are not by the millions going to suddenly fall in love with John Fetterman, but they're going to give him favorable media attention on conservative channels, and he's going to get, there's going to be a small smattering of voters who are voting for other Republicans or voting for Republican top of the ticket, but then leave that one blank or vote for Fetterman. Small sliver, you're right, but that's going to be enough to make the difference in Pennsylvania.
Right. No, my antipathy to him might be partly to do with the fact that I felt that he sort of presented himself when he was running for election in a very progressive way, and part of that was the the clothes and all that, you know, that he was this sort of emblem or voice of, you know, kind of left-leaning, outside the Beltway people. And, you know, increasingly I just think that seems somewhat fake, and it seems like a sort of costume that is used to disguise a very, very centrist, corporate-friendly, pro-Israel brand of politics, and I don't have much time.
Well, my opposition to him when he was running was his medical situation just seemed very sad and unfortunate, and I know he was chosen to be the nominee and then had the medical catastrophe right after, but from his performance in the debate, he just seemed to me totally incapable of doing the comms part of the job, which is, as I have said a lot recently, is a important part of being a national political figure. And I felt, well, did I feel bad for Democrats? Is that a phrase?
A rare event.
It was not ideal, yeah. But he has really recovered significantly since then. He's 10 times better at communication, and has rebranded himself in this somewhat right-friendly way that is not winning him any favors on the left or even with like elite Democratic media, but is probably going to be a good campaign strategy.
And I'll just say briefly, since I've criticized him several times during this segment, firstly, I'm obviously glad that he is recovering well from the medical conditions that afflicted him. And secondly, I do give him props from earlier on in his tenure being very open about his struggles with depression. And I think if there were more of that around, not just in politics, but in society, I think it would be healthy.
I agree with that. Well, that does it for us today on Rising. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are available anywhere you can listen to podcasts. It is only Tuesday. We will be back here tomorrow. See you then.